The horses were uneasy, but the king sat upon Snowmane, motionless, gazing from the agony of Minas Tirith. He seemed to shrink down, cowed by age. Merry himself felt as if a great weight of horror and doubt had settled on him. They were too late. Too late was worse than never. Perhaps Théoden would quail, bow his old head, turn, slink away to hide in the hills. And then as the darkness closed again, there came rolling over the fields a great boom. At that sound, the bent shape of the king sprang suddenly erect. Tall and proud he seemed again, and rising in his stirrups he cried in a loud voice, more clear than any there had ever heard a mortal man achieve before, "Arise, arise, riders of Théoden! Fell leads awake, fire and slaughter! Spears
shall be shaken! Shields shall be splintered! A sword day! A red day! And the sun rises!"
Straightway all the horns in the host were lifted up in music, and the blowing of the horns of Rohan in that hour was like a storm upon the plain, and a thunder in the mountains. Ride now, ride now, ride to Gondor!
And the bells ended!
Suddenly the king cried to Snowmane, and the horse sprang away. After him thundered the knights of his house, but he was ever before them. Fey he seemed, nor the battle fury of his fathers ran like new fire in his veins. And darkness was removed, and the hosts of Mordor wailed, and the terror overtook them, and they fled and died, and hoops of rock rode over them. And then
all the host of Rohan burst into song, and they sang as they slew, for the joy of battle was on them, and the sound of their singing that was fair and terrible came even to the city. If you're like me, that's probably one of your favourite scenes in all of cinema, and I think a lot of that comes down to the performance of this man.
On the feet, on the feet, on the feet. Jamboree sides.
That's right. So what are you shooting today, Bernard?
Oh, I have no idea.
Okay.
Bernard Hill's portrayal of King Théoden is undeniably one of the best pieces of acting in the whole Lord of the Rings series, and that's saying a lot. He brought so much complexity, depth, nuance, and authenticity to the role, and in doing so, he made a secondary character who isn't even in the first movie one of the most memorable in the whole story. And for that reason, I've wanted to do a video on Théoden almost since I started this channel, and so in light of Bernard Hill's recent passing, I've decided to honour him and his performance by dusting off some of my old Edoras footage and taking a look at Théoden as he is portrayed in the Peter Jackson trilogy to try and break down why his character is so compelling. And we start, like this video did, with the ride of the Rohirrim. As we have just seen, it's one of the scenes in the movies that is adapted pretty much verbatim from Tolkien, but if you were paying attention then you'll notice that I left out one key moment from that introduction. That detail of the sword and spears does not come from Tolkien, nor is it a directing innovation from Peter Jackson.
Bernard had come up with this idea of a sort of a ritualistic warrior kind of thing that the king would do with his frontline troops, which was riding along the front row, holding out his sword as they put their spears down and sort of rattling the sword along the shafts of the spears and creating this sound.
I thought, well, it'd be great for the final kind of rousing battle thing for Pelennor Fields.
That is the mark of an actor who understands his character and the world he lives in, who understands what the scene is about and wants to give it absolutely everything.
250 riders, you know, a lot of whom I knew. So I wasn't going to make a fool of myself. So that kind of spurred me on, really.
For me, it's proof that despite how perfect nearly every other aspect of the scene is, the writing, the music, the visuals, none of it would be enough if Théoden was portrayed by a lesser actor than Bernard Hill.
He actually generated enough enthusiasm and enough power that we really thought we were doing it. And when he said charge and we're calling death, 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 it was deafening.
Literally, they would be halfway down and the ground was shaking.
Those moments were phenomenal. I mean, the ride at the Rohirrim, in terms of film job experience, it's number one.
And just as it was Bernard Hill's number one film experience, so too is the ride of the Rohirrim Théoden's crowning moment in the trilogy. So much of its emotional weight and resonance comes from the fact that Théoden's entire journey has been leading up to this moment, where he leads his men into battle and to death. At one point in the book, Théoden describes himself to Saruman as a lesser son of greater sires, and while Tolkien geeks will quibble about the extent to which he truly believed that given the context, it is undeniable that this is what forms the basis of Théoden's character in the Peter Jackson movies, to the extent that in the movie the line is instead used by Saruman against Théoden.
You are a lesser son of greater sires.
He does this because he knows Théoden believes it, and it is this idea that underpins Bernard Hill's portrayal of the character. Théoden in the films is constantly plagued by this feeling of inadequacy and guilt. He feels the weight of history on his shoulders and believes that his ancestors are judging him and his rule. Because at first glance, Théoden seems to be a powerful leader, confident in his decisions, strong in battle and inspiring to his men. But we the audience see another side to him, the same side that Saruman can see and exploit. We quickly learn that Théoden is constantly questioning whether or not he is making the right choice for his people. He feels that Rohan's slow fall to Saruman was his fault, and that he is letting down his ancestors, his people, and of course, his fallen son, Theodred. And the reason Théoden is such a compelling character is because this feeling of insecurity that constantly weighs on his mind is also the very thing that drives him forward, and that gives him the strength to go on fighting, and to at least pretend to be the leader that Rohan needs, even if he doesn't think he can live up to that responsibility. This duality between his public face as the strong king and his private self filled with doubt is why I love Théoden, and Bernard Hill brings that depth and complexity to life in every single moment he is on screen. He threw himself into this role, even going so far as to take extra horse riding lessons to be truly comfortable as the King of the Horse Lords, and refusing to wear prosthetics for these scenes because he felt they would limit his performance.
The character has to come through, and if you put a prosthetic on somebody, I think by and large you limit the acting, and I think sometimes the audience can see it.
We first meet Théoden as a frail old man, totally corrupted by Saruman and his stooge Grima, who are slowly exploiting his age to weaken Rohan against the growing army of the White Hand. When Gandalf frees Théoden from this curse, his first instinct is one of anger and revenge.
Your leechcraft would have had me crawling on all fours like a beast.
He moves to execute Grima in a fit of rage, and it is only through Aragorn's intervention that he shows mercy. We'll come back to Théoden's relationship with Aragorn shortly, but the most important moment in this scene is not this one, but the moment that Théoden is met with this.
Hail Theoden, King!
Théoden is reminded in this moment that he is still a king and a leader of these people, and that they are looking to him to protect them as he has always done. His kingdom is under threat, and he must defend it, even though he is a man nearing the end of his time. Remember, Théoden has already fought his battles and won his wars, and should by rights be living out his twilight years, enjoying the peace that he spent his youth fighting for. But this is not to be.
Open war is upon you, whether you would risk it or not.
Gone are his dreams of a peaceful end to his reign. Here, the old, tired king must get back in the saddle and once again lead his men to victory or to ruin. And he must do so burdened by the guilt that he let his kingdom fall so far that he could not even protect his son and heir.
The young perish and the old linger.
Théoden's conversation with Gandalf on the foothills of Edoras is one of the most mournful moments in the entire story, and yet it's the funeral of a character we have never met. But we nonetheless grieve in the scene not for the character who is dead, but for who they left behind, and like the Ride of the Rohirrim, this scene's emotional weight comes from Bernard Hill's performance.
No parent should have to bury their child.
Our grief here is Théoden's grief, and these feelings of loss and guilt continue to follow the king for the rest of his story. If he cannot even protect his son and his lineage, what hope does he have of protecting his entire kingdom? Théoden expresses this guilt and struggle in many different ways, but it often comes to a head with Aragorn.
Stop that. Now behave yourself.
Honestly.
Oops, sorry, wrong clip. But while we're here, Bernard Hill's bromance with Viggo Mortensen could be a whole video in and of itself. Anyway, here's the actual moment Théoden shoots Aragorn down.
When last I looked, Theoden, not Aragorn, was king of Rohan.
Théoden is frustrated because in his heart he knows Aragorn is right, because Aragorn is the confident young leader that Théoden wishes he could be, that he himself was once upon a time. Remember, the last time Théoden and Aragorn met, Théoden himself was just a child and saw Aragorn ride off to war with his father.
He said that you rode to war with Thengel.
King Theoden has a good memory. He was only a small child at the time.
So of course Théoden finds himself feeling inferior when standing with the ageless Aragorn, who retained his youth and confidence while Théoden grew old and doubtful. Théoden projects his feeling of inadequacy onto Aragorn, and it leads to him lashing out and becoming a meme.
Where was Gondor when the Westfold fell?
But can you blame him? Of course Théoden is suspicious and to some extent jealous of this upstart heir to the throne of Gondor coming in and telling him what is best for his kingdom. A kingdom that Théoden has ruled for almost 40 years at this point in the story and has fought countless battles to defend and protect.
I have fought many wars, Master Dwarf. I know how to defend my own keep.
Basically, imagine if, 40 years after this moment, while Aragorn lived out his last years, this kid rocked up still looking younger than Orlando Bloom in The Hobbit and tried to tell Aragorn what to do. I reckon Aragorn would tell that kid where to shove it, and that's exactly how Théoden feels here, and he feels it even more strongly at Helm's Deep. We see Théoden walking the walls, confidently describing the ability of the fortress to defend them.
No army has ever breached the Deeping Wall.
Within these walls, we will outlast them.
He invokes Rohan's proud history to inspire his people and convince them that they are safe. But in this moment where Aragorn calls him out, we see the facade drop.
What would you have me do? Look at my men. Their courage hangs by a thread.
Théoden is speaking of the strength of Helm's Deep to convince himself as much as his people, and is frustrated that Aragorn would suggest otherwise. It's telling, I think, that besides these two moments, when he is blinded by anger at Grima's betrayal, and when he confronts Saruman himself at Orthanc, the only other time we see Théoden's anger rise to the surface is that moment with Aragorn.
Gondor will answer. Gondor. Where was Gondor when the Westfold fell?
But it is only a moment before he catches himself, and returns to his persona of the composed king.
Where was Gondor? No, my lord Aragorn. We are alone.
But in private, we see that Théoden knows Aragorn is right, and we see how he feels like an unworthy guardian of Rohan's history.
Who am I gambling?
He even recites the Lament for the Rohirrim, a poem that is all about the decline of Rohan from its former glory in the days of Earl the Young. But in spite of his doubt and fear, King Théoden still dons his armor and leads his men into battle. We the audience have seen how he privately feels about this fight, but when he is standing among his men, Théoden is nothing but the leader they need. He literally fights alongside them on the front line to defend the gate. But as the tide of the battle turns against him, the old king finds his strength fading, and he is overcome by helplessness.
The fortress is taken. It is over.
As Aragorn tries to find a way to evacuate the women and children, Théoden is giving up.
What can men do against such reckless hate?
But Aragorn convinces him to find his courage and to face his fate head on. And instead of giving in to his fear or lashing out at Aragorn, this time, Théoden is strong enough to admit that Aragorn is right.
Let this be the hour when we draw swords together.
He puts his ego and insecurities aside, and like he did on the walls, he invokes the history of his people to find his strength, but this time, he means it.
The horn of Helm Hammerhand shall sound in the deep one last time.
This charges a glorious moment, and one that will go down in the history books of Rohan. But of course, this is not how Théoden sees it. Instead of celebrating victory with his men, he is instead plagued by guilt that he failed them when they needed him most.
It was not Théoden of Rohan who led our people to victory.
Even after the victory, he worries that his judgment was wrong because it was not him, but Aragorn, Gandalf and Éomer who saved the day. He again feels unworthy of praise, and an unworthy descendant of his glorious forebears, whose great deeds are etched into the very armor he wears.
Théoden's armor is covered in heraldry and little stories. There are little scenes in his armor, acid etched of basic Rohirrim life. We even went to the extent of putting a golden sun emblem inside the armor, which will never be seen, but Bernard Hill saw it when he was putting it on and just went, oh, that's just so great. That makes me feel like a king, not an actor.
As time passes from the Battle of Helm's Deep, Théoden finds himself dwelling on this failure, so it's no wonder that he once again feels the need to assert himself when it is suggested that Rohan aid Gondor.
Why should we ride to the aid of those who did not come to ours?
Everyone can see that this is not Théoden trying to protect what little of his kingdom is left, but rather the stubbornness of an insecure leader feeling the need to protect his bruised ego.
What do we owe Gondor?
But when the beacons are lit, even the old king with a grudge knows that he must rise to the occasion, just as Gandalf knew he would.
And Rohan will answer. muster the Rohirrim.
Théoden is imperfect, and he would be the first to admit that, but the strength of his character is that in moments like these, the ones that really matter, he will always do the right thing. We are drawn to Théoden's character not because of the circumstances he finds himself in, but because of the choices he makes. Like Frodo and Moria, Théoden wishes none of this had happened.
Alas, that these evil days should be mine.
But he is wise and experienced enough to also know that so do all who live to see such times.
But that is not for them to decide. All we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given to us.
For all of his personal feelings of insecurity, when the chips are down, Théoden puts himself to one side and makes the best decision for his people, unlike another leader I could mention. Denethor is faced with the same situation as Théoden, an old leader ruling over a declining empire under threat. But Denethor retreats into himself, holds onto a distorted reality of Gondor's might, sends his son off to die, and sees plots and treachery when there are none. That is what he decides to do with the time that is given to him, and it brings his empire to the brink of destruction. What Théoden decides to do is lead his men into a battle that he knows they will surely lose, not because he is a power-hungry, bloodthirsty warlord, but because he knows that this is a fight that is bigger than him. It is a fight for the future of men against the shadow of Mordor, and he knows that Rohan must play its part. And as he rides to Gondor, his thoughts are not of himself but of his people, which is why he names Éowyn as his successor.
The people are to follow your rule in my stead.
Théoden knows Éowyn wants to fight for her people like her uncle and brother, but his refusal to let her do so is not chauvinism, it's because he knows that she is the leader that Rohan needs. Théoden sees in Éowyn the strength of will he wishes he had. Éowyn is not plagued by self-doubt, and Théoden knows that when his reign ends, she is the one who Rohan will need to lead them, and to restore Rohan to the glory that he feels that he allowed it to lose.
You shall live to see these days renewed.
And unlike every other decision, we can see that this is one that Théoden is utterly sure about. And it is from here, having finally accepted his fate, that we see a Théoden transformed. He hears his men discussing their hopeless situation, and instead of projecting a false hope, he instead admits his own fears to them.
We cannot defeat the armies of Mordor.
No, but we will meet them in battle nonetheless.
Théoden uses his insecurity as a strength and uses it to inspire his men who would follow him to whatever end.
To whatever end.
And so the Rohirrim arrive at the Pelennor Fields, and Théoden gazes out over the hosts of Mordor. As Tolkien wrote, Théoden again wonders if he is making the right decision. He knows that even now, it is not too late to turn back. But Théoden does not turn back. No longer will Théoden let his fear overcome him. This time, there is no Aragorn to convince him to ride out and meet his enemy. This time, Théoden must find the strength of will to do this himself, and to bring his people with him. In this scene, there is no hint of the self-doubting Théoden, no sign of the man who feels himself to be the lesser son of greater sires. Here, Théoden, king of the Mark of Rohan, rallies the Rohirrim, and at the age of 70, just as Tolkien wrote, he literally leads the charge with the battle fury of his fathers running like new fire in his veins, and the cry of death on the wind. And as we all know, that battle cry is prophetic, just as Théoden suspected it would be. He is slain by no less a foe than the Witch King of Angmar, and then he finds himself in Éowyn's arms.
I know your face.
And in his final moments, Théoden finds peace. Seeing Éowyn, he knows for certain that he made the right decision, and that she does indeed have the strength to lead Rohan after he is gone. So it's a shame that Éomer becomes king instead and Éowyn goes and shacks up with Faramir, but never mind that. Because it is in this moment that Théoden also puts to rest the doubts and fears that have plagued him for his whole reign. The fears that he is not worthy, that he is the lesser son of greater sires. On the Pelennor Fields, after leading the ride of the Rohirrim and answering the call of Gondor, a deed that made him one of the only mortal men Tolkien ever compared to the Valar, King Théoden finally sees himself how Éowyn and all of his people saw him. He sees himself for the leader he always was.
I go to my fathers, in whose mighty company I shall not now feel ashamed.
Théoden is one of the most compelling and complex characters in the entire Lord of the Rings trilogy, and we are truly blessed to have had an actor like Bernard Hill bring him to life. an actor who understood the nuances and internal struggles this man felt, but who could still rally and inspire hundreds of people just like the king did. More than that, he was a man who by all accounts was a total professional and an absolute delight to work with.
He was immediately a huge presence. He got it, you know what I mean, straight away.
He's got those kind of jolly sort of red cheeks and a great sort of take the piss sort of biting attitude that's just hilarious.
When Bernard came down, he's just one of those people you immediately knew and was going to fit in with the rest of the cast and crew.
Yeah! Ngā Mārie, Bernard Hill, and thank you.
Hail the victorious dead!